I never expected a hiking trip to be the thing that unraveled everything I'd been trying to hide. It had been months since I last had a real break. Life had turned into a blur of work emails, half-finished coffee cups, and pretending I wasn't. Counting the seconds every time his name lit up my phone. So when he suggested the mountain weekend, just the two of us, like old times, I said yes before my brain had time to remind my heart what a bad idea it was. We'd been friends for years, ever since freshman year of college when we got paired on a group project, and he made fun of my color-coded notes. He was the kind of guy who didn't try to be charming, but ended up that way anyway, laid back, sarcastic, with that infuriating half-smile that said he never took anything too seriously. Except, of course, for the people he cared about. That was the part most people missed. I never did. I was already waiting by the trailhead when his car pulled up, gravel crunching under tires. The sun was starting to dip, casting long shadows through the trees. He stepped out in his worn boots and that same navy windbreaker he always wore on trips like this, faded at the seams, smelling faintly of pine and laundry detergent. It used to be my favorite thing about him, that he never changed. But lately, it was starting to feel like I was the only one holding on to the past. Ready for this? He grinned, slamming the car door and tossing me a granola bar like it was a peace offering. I nodded, slipping it into my backpack without a word. I could already feel the weight of the weekend settling on my chest, tighter than the straps across my shoulders. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and chose to ignore it. He was good at that. The trail stretched out ahead of us, winding into tall firs and the kind of silence that made it hard to hide from yourself. I tried to focus on the rhythm of my boots against dirt, the crunch of twigs, the breeze threading through the trees. But he walked just a few steps ahead of me, close enough that I could hear the low timbre of his humming, and suddenly all I could think about was how close we were and how far apart. We'd always been. He wasn't even supposed to be my friend, really. We came from two different worlds. Me, quiet and observant, always hanging back in group settings, and him, the guy who could walk into any room and somehow belong. But somewhere between group, study sessions and cafeteria debates over which fast food fries were superior, we just clicked. He never treated me like I had to be anything other than exactly who I was. And maybe that's what made it dangerous. Because the more he saw me, the more I started wishing he could see everything. We joked a lot. That was our thing. Even now, hiking up the switchbacks, both of us a little out of breath and pretending not to be, the teasing hadn't stopped. "You still pack like you're preparing for the apocalypse," he called over his shoulder, glancing, back with a smirk. "And you still bring one water bottle for a 3-day trip," I shot back. "So we balance each other out, like an irresponsible seesaw." He laughed, shaking his head, his hair catching the sunlight in a way that made my chest ache a little. I looked away before he caught me staring. We took breaks often, partly because the trail was steep, but mostly because we liked to take our time. He pointed out weird-looking trees, made up names for them on the spot. I pretended to hate it, but I was cataloging every one of those moments like they meant something. Like they could mean more someday. When we finally made it to the campsite, the sun was melting behind the ridge, and the air had taken on that crisp bite that meant nighttime would be cold. I started unpacking while he tried, badly, to figure out how to set up his tent. "You sure you don't need a degree in engineering for this thing?" he muttered, struggling with a tangled pole. "You've had that tent for 5 years," I said, crouching down beside him. "At this point, it's not the tent, it's user error." He bumped my shoulder with his. "You missed your calling as a comedian." But the bump lingered a little longer than necessary, and when he didn't move away immediately, I felt every molecule in my body go quiet, alert. He looked at me, smiling still, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite place. Or maybe I just wanted there to be. When night finally fell, we huddled around a tiny fire, eating instant noodles straight from the pot. "The stars were insane out here," So bright they almost looked fake. I always forget how quiet it gets, he said, leaning back on his hands. Like the world hits mute. Kind of peaceful, right? I said, wrapping my arms around my knees. He nodded. Makes you think about stuff. Like what? He paused. I don't know. Life, people. Who you can really talk to when things get weird. I glanced at him. You've got people, though. Yeah, he said, but didn't sound convinced. The fire crackled softly between us, and he reached for a log to toss in. I caught myself watching the way his fingers curled around it, the way his wrist flexed beneath the hem of his sleeve. Stupid details, meaningless, except they weren't to me. Later, while setting up for sleep, he unzipped his pack and froze. No way. What? I forgot my sleeping bag. I blinked. You're kidding. I wish I was. I stared at him, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. You brought one water bottle and no sleeping bag. You're going to die up here. He gave me a sheepish look. You think I could maybe squeeze into yours? Just until morning? My heart did an Olympic-level somersault. Yeah, I said, trying to sound casual. We'll make it work. We did. Somehow. The tent felt much smaller than it had earlier. Warmer, too. I could feel the tension in my shoulders, tight and coiled as he slid in beside me. Our bodies brushed, and even though we were both pretending it was no big deal, I couldn't stop hearing every breath, feeling every inch of space that wasn't between us. He was already half asleep when I whispered, almost to myself, "UK always forget something," and he murmured, eyes closed. Good thing I've got you then. I didn't sleep much that night, not with him so close, not with the weight of everything I hadn't said pressing against my ribs. But I didn't regret a single second. The morning after was colder than I expected, and somehow quieter too. He was still asleep when I woke up, curled slightly toward me, his face softened in a way I rarely got to see when he was awake. For a second, I let myself look, really look, at him. At the faint freckles across his nose, the curve of his jaw, the way one side of his mouth lifted even in sleep, like he was dreaming of something funny. Or maybe someone. My arm had fallen between us during the night, and it was pinned there, shoulder stiff and fingers numb. I didn't move, not yet. I knew as soon as he opened his eyes the spell would break, and we'd go back to our carefully maintained closeness with boundaries. Friends, always friends. Eventually, he stirred. Blinking slowly, his gaze met mine, sleepy and warm, and for a second, neither of us said anything. Morning, he mumbled, voice rough with sleep. Morning. We untangled ourselves clumsily, pretending it hadn't meant anything. He stretched with a groan, brushing against my leg as he sat up, and I forced myself to breathe evenly. I kept my eyes on the corner of the tent, anywhere but him. The plan for the day was simple. Hike to a ridge a few miles out, have lunch, maybe set up camp early depending on how we felt. But halfway through the trail, he twisted his ankle, stepping on a loose rock. The snap wasn't loud, but the way he winced and immediately dropped to sit made my heart seize. You okay? I crouched beside him, already knowing the answer. Yeah. Just give me a second. He tried to laugh it off, but his face was tight with pain. I helped him peel off his boot. The ankle was already swelling, skin going a shade darker. You can't walk on this. He didn't argue. That's how I knew it was bad. We were still a few miles from camp and even farther from the car. No signal, no real help out here, just us. Okay, I said, taking a breath. We need to find shelter. There's that overhang we passed about half a mile back. He nodded, jaw clenched. He leaned on me as we limped back. His weight against me was heavy, grounding. I could feel the heat of his body through my clothes, and every now and then he'd shift, his arm tightening around my shoulders for support. My mind kept replaying the same useless loop. This is fine. It means nothing. He'd do the same for anyone. But I wasn't just anyone. Not to me, anyway. The rock overhang was small, barely enough room for both of us, but it shielded us from the wind. I helped him sit, rummaged for a cold compress from the first aid kit, wrapped his ankle as best I could. Every time I touched him, I could feel his eyes on me, but when I looked up, he'd glance away. He leaned back against the rock wall, exhaling slowly. "Thanks for this." "Don't thank me yet," I muttered, trying to keep it light. "We're stuck here for the night. Could be worse." He looked at me again, a half smile tugging at his lips. "At least the company's good." That kind of thing was what made it so hard. The way he said things like that. The way his words danced just close enough to mean something, but never quite landed. As night fell and the temperature dropped, we had no choice but to crawl into the sleeping bag together again. One bag, one space. My heart had not stopped racing all day, and now it threatened to explode as we lay side by side. So close our arms touched. He shifted slightly, his leg brushing mine. "Sorry," he said. "It's fine." My voice was too soft, too shaky. I cleared my throat. Warmth is kind of the point. His laugh was low, almost nervous. Didn't think we'd be spooning in the woods, but hey, life's weird. Froze. Not because of the joke, but because of the way he said it. Light, but laced with something else. An undertone I couldn't name. He turned his head toward me in the dark. "Can I ask you something?" My chest tightened. "Sure. Do you ever think maybe we missed something? Like somewhere along the way?" I stopped breathing. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. He paused, and I felt his fingers graze mine under the blanket. "Sometimes I think about stuff. About us. About what this is." I swallowed hard. "You never said anything before." "Yeah. I know." His voice was barely audible now. "But maybe I should have." Silence stretched between us, heavy and loaded. My brain was screaming at me to say something, to do something, but all I could do was lie there, heart hammering, body still. His hand brushed mine again, this time more deliberately. "I like this. Being here. With you." I turned toward him, and even in the darkness, I could feel the weight of his gaze. "You're not just saying that because you're injured and cold, right?" He laughed, quiet and sincere. "No, I'm saying it because I think I've been lying to myself. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But part of me still clung to the fear that I was reading too much into it, that this was just another almost moment we'd pretend never happened. But then he leaned closer. Not quite a kiss, not yet, but close enough that our breaths mingled. My fingers trembled as I reached up to touch his arm, to steady myself, or maybe to ground the moment in something real. "I don't want to mess this up," I whispered. He didn't pull away. "Then don't." And still, we stayed like that, frozen. Not by fear, but by the sheer intensity of what was finally unraveling between us. We didn't speak for a long time after that. Lying there in the cramped warmth of the sleeping bag, bodies pressed close, breath shallow with thoughts we weren't ready to say aloud. His hand was still near mine, not quite touching now, just hovering like the air between us had started to carry weight. Outside, the wind brushed across the rocks like a whisper. The fire we'd built earlier was long dead, and all we had left was this pocket of heat, his thigh against mine, the soft rhythm of his breathing. "You still awake?" he asked quietly, as if it would be easier to talk if it didn't feel like daytime. "Yeah," I said. I wasn't sure I'd sleep at all. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, that you didn't want to mess this up." I turned, my head toward him. In the darkness, his silhouette was just a shape beside mine, but his voice made everything sharper. "Yeah." Why would you mess it up? I hesitated. The question sat there between us like a challenge. Because if I told you the truth, things would change. And I don't know if you'd still want to be here. He was quiet. I hated that silence. I don't think I'd stop wanting to be here, he said slowly, like each word cost him something. I swallowed. My throat was tight, my heart louder than it had ever been. I like you, I said finally. The words came out smaller than I'd meant, like they'd been kept inside too long and lost their weight. Not just like the way I should. I've liked you for a while. The silence this time was unbearable. I could feel my chest rising too fast, my body locking up. I figured, he said. My stomach dropped. You did? He nodded. I think a part of me always knew. But I didn't want to believe it because then I'd have to admit a lot of things I've been ignoring. My breath caught. Like what? He shifted slightly, his arm brushing mine. Again. Like the fact that I feel different around you than I do around anyone else. I didn't have a name for it. I just knew that when you weren't there, something felt off. I turned more toward him, heart threatening to split open. Then why didn't you say something? Because I thought I was straight. Because I didn't want to lead you on. Because I was scared it wasn't real. I don't know. Pick a reason. I had 100. I could feel the emotion building, the kind that sits in your throat and makes your eyes sting. You don't have to say anything you don't mean, not just because we're here, stuck in this sleeping bag, or because you feel sorry for me. He looked at me then, really looked, even in the dark. Do you think I would be doing this if I didn't mean it? I didn't know how to answer that. He reached out slowly, hesitantly, and let his fingers brush the side of my face. It wasn't a grand gesture. It was careful, like he was afraid I might pull away. You scare me, he admitted. Because being with you feels like jumping off a cliff I didn't know I was standing on. I've been falling for months, I said, voice cracking. You just didn't look down. His hand stayed on my cheek, and then, just like that, he closed the distance. His lips pressed to mine, tentative, uncertain, but real. Every nerve in my body lit up. I didn't move for a second, stunned that it was actually happening. Then I kissed him back. It wasn't perfect. Our noses bumped. We were both a little shaky, but none of that mattered. His hand curled against my jaw, mine found its way to his chest. He was warm, solid, real. When we finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against mine. So, that just happened. Yeah, I breathed. That really happened. He laughed quietly, like something inside him had finally relaxed. I don't know what this means yet. I'm still figuring it out. But I know I want to figure it out with you. That's enough, I said.
And it was. We stayed like that for a while, close, tangled up, just letting the weight of everything we hadn't said finally settle into something true. His thumb moved gently across the back of my hand. Every tiny motion felt magnified, intimate.
Earned. Eventually, he pulled the blanket tighter around us, tucking me in a little closer. So, you think there's more hot chocolate left? I laughed, letting my forehead fall against his shoulder. We just kissed for the first time and you're thinking about hot chocolate? Multitasking, he said with a grin I could hear. I'm very emotionally complex. Yeah, you are. He kissed my forehead then, soft, lingering. The kind of kiss that says I see you even when words fail. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely seen, completely safe, whatever. Tomorrow looked like, whatever came after this, I knew we'd be facing it together. We didn't sleep much that night. Maybe it was the adrenaline. Maybe it was the shared body heat. Or maybe it was the fact that once something so tightly held is finally said aloud, it's hard to let go of the moment. We kept shifting, not to get comfortable, but just to touch, to remind ourselves this was real now. Every time our hands brushed or our legs bumped beneath the sleeping bag, it felt like electricity. I woke up just after dawn, still curled into his side. His arm was wrapped lazily around my waist, his hand resting under my shirt like he'd just forgotten to move it. The skin-to-skin contact was new and familiar all at once. I didn't move, afraid that if I did, the spell would break. Instead, I stared at the ceiling of the tent, my mind replaying everything from the night before on a loop. His breath changed a little. He was awake. "You're staring," he murmured without opening his eyes. "You snore a little when you're on your back," I said, smirking. He groaned and turned on his side, pulling me with him like it was second nature. "Great. Guess I'll never be sexy again." "You were sexy?" I teased. He pinched my side. "Keep talking. I'll take back the kiss." I laughed, but my heart was swelling. Joking like this, tangled together like it was the most natural thing in the world. It felt like we'd always been moving toward this. We just hadn't let ourselves admit it. There was a quiet pause. His fingers brushed against my wrist. "That wasn't a mistake last night, right?" I shook my head. "No, not even a little." "I've been thinking," he said, voice softer now. "I don't know exactly what this makes me, or how to explain it to anyone else. But I know I want you. I want to try, whatever that looks like." A lump formed in my throat. I turned toward him, pressing my forehead against his. "We'll figure it out. Together." He kissed me again, slower this time, like he wasn't in a rush to prove anything. Like he wanted to memorize the shape of this new beginning. Later, we emerged from the tent and made instant coffee with water heated over the fire pit. Everything looked different in the morning light, clearer, warmer. He handed me a cup, our fingers brushing intentionally this time. "So," I said, sipping. "What now? We tell people, or?" He shrugged, stirring his cup with a stick. "Maybe we don't need to have all the answers right away. Maybe we just see where this goes. Spend more time like this. You and me." "Yeah," I said, nudging his shoulder with mine. "You and me." He leaned back on his hands, looking out over the view like he could finally breathe. "You know, I'm kind of glad we forgot the second sleeping bag. Accidentally on purpose kind of glad." I grinned. "Definitely on purpose," he said, eyes flicking to mine, full of something new, something soft and sure. "I think I've been waiting for an excuse to be this close to you." We sat there for a long time, our legs touching, mugs in hand, letting the silence stretch. But this time, it was the good kind, the kind filled with unspoken promises and quiet certainty. Whatever came next, we'd face it side by side. The sun had already begun its slow descent behind the mountain peaks as we packed up our things. The air smelled like pine and cooling ashes, and the quiet between us was no longer heavy. It was peaceful, filled with small smiles and quiet glances. That said more than words could. He bent down to roll up the tent, his shoulders moving in rhythm with the task, and I found myself watching him with a softness I wasn't used to. Not because I hadn't looked at him like that before. I had. Plenty, but because now I didn't have to hide it. "Hey," I said, tossing him one of the tent poles. He caught it and grinned. "You gonna help, or just supervise?" "I'm supervising with love," I replied. "It's a very specialized role." He shook his head with a smile, then stepped closer. "Come here." I met him halfway, the woods quiet except for the chirp of distant birds. He reached down and gently took my hand, threading his fingers through mine like he'd done it 100 times before. It wasn't a kiss or a big declaration. It was just our hands, connected, Easy. Certain. I want to do more of this, he said quietly. Not just out here. I mean, back home. With you. My heart tightened in the best way. You're sure? I'm not sure about everything yet, he admitted. But I'm sure about this. I'm sure about you. I squeezed his hand, grounding myself in that moment. So what do we tell people? He shrugged, his thumb brushing the back of my hand. We tell them whatever we want. Or nothing. Let's just live it first. The hike back down was lighter somehow. Our jokes carried further, our silences felt warmer, and every now and then, we'd reach for each other, just to touch, to remind ourselves that this wasn't a dream we'd leave behind in the woods. When we finally reached the bottom, the car sat waiting where we'd left it, dusty and sun-warmed. He threw his bag into the back and turned to me. Next trip, he said, slamming the trunk shut. We don't forget the second sleeping bag. You snore worse than I do. I rolled my eyes. You're lucky I'm into emotionally confusing men with bad sleeping habits. I knew it, he said, laughing as he opened the driver's side door. You're just in it for the chaos. And the kissing, I added. He leaned in before I could buckle my seatbelt and gave me a quick kiss right there in the open. It wasn't dramatic or showy. It was a promise, plain and simple. As we drove off, the radio hummed low between us. He reached across the center console without looking and laced his fingers with mine again. We didn't say much on the way home. We didn't need to. The road ahead wasn't clear, and maybe there'd be bumps and turns we didn't see coming. But we were on it together. And that, I realized, was more than enough.